Mm. Okay. So last week when we started, right, we talked about the various interviewing techniques. How do you go about three different stages of like it's kind of preparing for an interview? What were those three stages? Can anybody tell me? Right, prepare, conduct, and review, right? So as you collect all of that information, right, we talked about it, that you need to start thinking about it, is once you collect all of the data, how are you gonna organize, right? The way you organize is like to kind of highlight what are the key things that you learned about it. What are the gaps? So obviously, as they will tell you the information, you will start understanding, hey, then maybe this is the other area that I need to dive in, or I need to go talk to somebody to learn it more about that particular things. You will also going to start seeing it, some of the common themes that's emerging that you need to kind of organize all of your requirements, processes around it. Then there will be actions that you need to follow it. And also, a lot of times, if you're meeting with a stakeholder, you get a lot of decision in terms of what is the scope, what is the overall solutions that they're looking at, what are the capabilities that needs to be built now versus what the capabilities that you need to build it later. Okay. So then one of the key things that you start building out is the requirements. Okay. So let's first understand what are the different types of requirements you're going to see here. Okay. So a lot of times when they talk about it, specifically the stakeholders, they will talk in terms of what is the general requirements, in terms of, hey, what is the scope of the solution needs to be in, right? And so here's an example, right? So you may like it see it, they said, hey, I need to build a solution that is required for all of my users to enable the maintaining the customers and how my salespeople are managing their contact, right? So if they kind of put it those kind of things, it's a general requirement, right? It gives you not a one specific thing, but the entire broader solution that needs to be built. Then sometimes you will see it, they refer it more from a business perspective of it, right? So what capabilities that the solution deliver for the business, right? in the custom creations, right? We talked about, hey, it should allow us, our corporate customers, to order the items. Right? It will allow our pricing people to set the price based on the volume, based on the discount, and based on the promotions. Right? Same thing, it's like it's user, if the user should be able to create a record of contact whenever the salesperson contacts them. That's a general business requirement. And the reason why it's a business is because it's thinking it from outside in, from a customer and a business point of view. Versus when you look into the specific functional requirement, it talks about what is the specific functionality that they need to build it. Okay. So again, this one talks about, hey, I want to be able to record the contact. These functional requirements tell you what exactly the contact details that it's going to start recording it. Right. Then you take the same functional requirements and start drilling it down through the questions: what, why, how, where, when, why, right? Then it becomes a detailed requirement, right? So essentially, like it's this detailed requirements will tell you the specific, right? So for example, like it's when the in the custom creations, right? When a corporate customer logs in, they need to probably provide their credentials and validation with the corporate ID. There may be some sort of an integration that they may require to validate, hey, if I'm saying is that I'm corporation A's employee and I'm trying to create an account with you, there should be a way for validating that I'm indeed a corporate A's customer, right? So for example, if you're ever trying to do any of the online services, right? Like it's trying to renew it. Let's say if I'm trying to renew it, my driver's license, right? It'll tell you, like it's as a part of functional requirements, that, hey, I should be able to validate I am the person who says I am, right? And there may be additional ways, right? There may be, hey, I'm going to it's going to provide it my old license number, email address. You will send me an OTP to that to validate it and provide certain credentials that I provided when I created my license first time. Then you're going to see it a non-functional requirement. So functional focuses around the business needs. Non-functional focuses around the operational characteristics of a system. Right. So for example, if you're trying to it's kind of execute, let's say if you're a account with some sort of a Wall Street firm where you're selling and buying stocks, right? So non-functional requirement maybe is, hey, my trade must be executed within 2 seconds, right? It's not telling you how the trade should be executed, but it is putting in operational characteristics. What is it needed for, right? Another example is, hey, system should allow us to support X number of users at the same time. Okay. So those becomes a non-functional requirement. One of the other thing we talked about it is, hey, if you're in any of the medical or healthcare industries, you need to follow the HIPAA compliance, right? So that HIPAA compliance comes around with the security aspects, right? So you may have a non-functional requirement which says, hey, all of the user information must be encrypted using this technology type of thing, right? That's a non-functional requirement. Then there is a data requirement, right? So what kind of data rules it needs to enforce it, right? If I'm taking a loan, right, I need to have my credit background checked, right? So they'll say, hey, you must provide a tax identification number or a social security number, right? That's my data requirement, right? That I need to enforce it, that particular piece of data has to be present no matter what I provided. Okay. Also, there may be also kind of relationship, right? So in the custom creations we talked about, right? A corporate customer may have multiple users that may order an item, right? So the relationship there is one to many. One corporate customers may have many users. That's nothing but a data rule, right? That, hey, I need to allow more than one person for the corporation. Then the last thing that they talk about it is the technical requirements, right? In this case, they may dictate it specific technology or specific architecture. So when you look into the PHN, there are hints of few technical requirements in there, right? Because it's specifically talking about what do I need it as I go through it. Okay. So if you talk about all of those type of requirements, right? Then you need to organize it, right? But one way to think about organizing it is from whose perspective? Okay. So if I write all of my business requirements from a business user perspective, a lot of times that document is referred as a requirements and definition document. Okay. If you're building it from the intention that, hey, I'm going to give it to my development team to build it, that's going to be a specification requirement document. Okay. The key difference is the technical specification requirements document, it's going to be much more precise. Right. So if you look into when we talk about the business versus functional, right? Even there is a degree of specificity in the functional that was not presented in the business requirement. Often what you're going to find it nowadays is there is no plain cookie cutter. You're going to start seeing a document. If it's a big corporation, it's going to be much more formal, that where you're going to send out the contractors and stuff. You're going to be much more in the definition document. And then they take on to build it out a specification document by talking to the users, talking to their IT systems. So as a business analyst, right, you need to really understand the difference between those two. And what you're going to see a lot of times, it blends it. So you're not going to have only the business user requirement. There could be a combination of business user and the technical specification. Okay. Now, well, we talked about the functional and non-functional requirements. So what does it cover? So think around functional requirements. Anytime you're trying to define any business or feature capabilities, it has three components of it. Okay. The first one is what input I'm going to provide it and what output I should expect it, right? So what are my input outputs? Second part of that is what should be the business processing involved into that function. Okay. And the third thing is that if things doesn't work as expected, what kind of errors I should expect and how should I deal with it? Okay. So an example is you may have a login as a functional requirement, right? Saying that, hey, as a user, I need to provide it my user ID and a password, right? Those two are my input. The output is it should allow me to successfully log in and access the homepage. So that's an output. What is the business processing aspect of it? That, hey, it's going to take my user ID and a password, and it's going to validate it that it follows certain standards, and it is provisioned already in the system so that there is a profile associated with it, right? Because if I'm trying to build it out of custom creations and I log in using user ID and a password, it needs to know it, hey, is my profile a customer profile or an employee profile? Because depending on that, the functionality that I can access in the system, it's going to be different, right? So my processing just talks about it is that, hey, if somebody provides a user ID and a password, there are two things you need to do. You need to validate it. And once it's validated, you need to find an associated profile. And based on that, you display the homepage, what they see it when they log in. And then the error handling aspects of it is, what if there's no profile associated? Then how do I handle that? What happens is if my user ID is valid, but the password is invalid, what happens if I try to type in too many times the wrong password. Should system lock me out? If so, how long? Does anybody else then has to interact it and unlock my account? Or after a certain period, it automatically unlocks it for me. Right? So those kind of things form our functional requirements. Then we talked about non-functional requirements are essentially in operations abilities, or what they call it as LEDs. Right? So what does that involve? Right? It may involve it like it's physical environments. From what locations you can access it, right? What devices you can access it, right? So if I'm like, it's kind of going to a sensitive plant information, right? Let's say I'm kind of doing it a chemical or nuclear plant. You don't want people to be able to access all of those systems and controls remotely all the time, right? There are certain functions that say that you need to must be present in the building to do that. Mm-hmm. The other aspects is what kind of interfaces you're gonna have it, right? What systems you're gonna interact with it, but what standards those interfaces needs to follow. So if I'm like it's purchasing something in custom creation and performing a payment, what kind of payment interface needs to be secure, right? Because you can't send your credit card information in open. Same thing with the HIPAA related information, right? The other aspect is who are my users and what is the skill level? And the reason why it's important is because that'll identify how much training I need to perform for somebody to use this product, right? Or to my application. Some of the other non-functional requirement is performance, right? We talked about, hey, how fast it should respond it. Okay. What should be the documentation? Like do I need a user manual to do that? If so, what kind of things? What should be in that documentation? What is kind of security is involved, right? How often I should be backing it up, all of the customer data, right? What kind of firewall it's needed, right? Because you don't want to go into let's say if you're like it's performing a banking, you don't want all of your data to be lost as soon as the bank system crashes, right? There needs to be a backup. There needs to be restored, those kind of things. Some of the other non-functional requirements talks around the quality assurance aspects of it. Okay, so there are two concepts. It's essentially is what is the maximum downtime it can afford it, right? So as you go in, the people will start talking about, hey, it's a 2.9 availability, or 3.9, or 4.9, or 5.9 availability, right? What that means is the system needs to be up 99%. Or if they say it's a 5.9, it's a 99.999% system needs to be available, right? And that requires a different architecture, right? That requires a different testing, that requires a different capabilities. So you need to know all of those abilities. And then there is another aspect of the system is around mean time between the failure. Okay. So what is tolerant level between one failure and another failure, right? How often system stays up or down, right? So when you look into around Thanksgiving, right? The mean time between failure, it's going to be a little bit higher than what your normal it is. If you're like, it's kind of a shopping or online retailer type of things, because the amount of the user gets in is significantly higher, right? And it's going to put a resource constraint. But at the same time, you can't say that for a 911 system, right? Because people's life and death is involved, right? So mean time between the failure, irrespective of what scenario happens, needs to be very minimal.
So
Yes.
Thanksgiving and 9. when it is Thanksgiving, we don't have control on the people, like how many people are using. But like,
You don't have control either in 911. In fact,
Yeah.
there was an earthquake
yes.
yesterday, right, in Myanmar.
Yeah.
People call it for the service. You can't say, hey, I can support only 100 people at a time, right? You need to have an ability to do that. You can't just say one of the biggest failure, like it's if you were around, back in like it was 13 or 14, 2013 or 14, when Katrina hit the Gulf Coast, right? There was a huge meltdown. The other example is if you were around, and part of the reason I know it because I was in the telecom industry when 911 hit, or like it's September 11, right? Most of the telecom systems or the cell phones are designed to have it only roughly about like it's 20 to 30% occupancy of the tower at any given time. Right? So that's why when you pick it up a phone, it just rings it all the time. That day, nobody could get it through the calls because there was a more than like it's a million people trying to like it's hit the phone at the same time, trying to figure out what the hell is happening that day. Right? So those are some of the examples that you need to do at SA. What is the mean time between failure? What is my maximum time? What is my uptime available for those systems? What is my concurrent users? I'm expecting it. All of those things comes into the play.
So, like, if it is a PHN, if it is an art loan, and if it is like custom creation, what will like?
So each one will have a different expectation of how much downtime can happen, right?
Okay.
So let's say if I'm an art loan, the example I talked about, right? It's nothing but a car, like it's, hey, if I'm going it, can I get funded? What is the likelihood that somebody will be up at 2 a.m. requesting my car needs to be fixed? That's very unlikely, right? So you may say, hey, my system is going to be up between, let's say 7 a.m. to, let's say 10 p.m. Okay. But between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., I can bring system down to do whatever updates I need to do it because nobody else is going to access it at the same time. When you talk about the PHN, right? When a patient is in urgent care in the middle of night and doctors wants to find out, hey, were they immunized against this particular thing? They may need to access that system. So you can't say, hey, it's going to be available only during this window, right? So depending on the systems, right? That's why you need to ask those questions to draft it out the proper non-functional requirements. What should be the characteristics of the system? Right? And then based on that, there will be different solutions. Right? Nowadays, most of the things is on cloud. Right? That means I have, depending on what configuration people use it, right? There's a notion about active, passive, but the passive is cold start. Right? It's essentially if my primary server fails, where do I go for my backup server? And is that backup server is live on the traffic at the same time? Activity means is, hey, I have 2 instances of a machine. If this one doesn't get it, I'm going to go get that automatically. Or half of the users go to this route and half the users go to this route. You need to ask those kind of questions. So, hey, what kind of you want it? What happens when system crashes? How long I have it before I can restore it and bring it back up, right? So, and those like it goes into when you're building a power grid, or you're building 911 type of systems, or you're doing a highly available medical or financial systems. You want to do it, right? Because you don't want to go at like if you're a bank, you don't want to go and say, hey, the whole backbone of the ATM is down, therefore you can't withdraw any money. Right? There is a real life implication on people's life when they are not able to withdraw the money. Let's talk about once you collect the requirements, what do you need to do? Right? So as you build the requirements, there are a few things that you need to keep in mind, right? You need to ask yourself a question. Whatever I'm writing as a requirement, is it correct, complete, and consistent? So a lot of times they will refer it as three Cs. Okay. Correct in the sense that, does it really belong into this problem domain space? So if I'm doing a medical requirement, right, or things like a PHN, should not be saying, hey, people can arrive by car, or that has nothing to do with that, right? So does it belong into the problem domain space that you're trying to talk about? Second aspect, is it consistent? Okay, so in the one place, they say it's, hey, I should be able to access all of the medical history up to past 7 years. Right. But then another user comes and says, you need to essentially archive and delete all of the data, which is older than 5 years. Now, then you ask a question, hey, one is 7, one is 5. What is the truth? What is consistency? What should system behave at? Should it do it 7 years or keep it data for 7 years? Or is it narrowing it down to 5 years? Right. So if you get the contrasting, that's where the gap in finding comes in. Right? So when you interview one person, they may have a different perspective. Other person, you identify what are the things that doesn't connect or it's not consistent, and you go and ask specific question to make it consistent. The third aspect is complete. Okay. So when they say it, hey, it should meet the HIPAA requirement. First question you usually ask it is, what is that requirements or standards documented? Can I refer it? Can I have an understanding of it? Does it contradict anything with the others, right? Or they say, hey, go ahead and it should follow the process defined by counting XYZ. Right? Do you have a reference to that process? If you don't, your requirement is not complete, or you're trying to refer them to something that doesn't exist or it's not accessible. So you need to make sure your requirement follows all those three C's before it can be given to the development team to build a solution around it. Okay. Most important thing is make sure every requirement is described what needed by customers, right? So in this case, it's a functional if I'm accessing the users. If you're looking at non-functional requirements, it is still required by your stakeholder, right? Whoever is funding it still needs those characteristics into the systems. So everything that you document as a part of the requirements, it is something that is requested by somebody, which is in your stakeholder map. Okay, if anybody outside stakeholder map demands it, yeah, it's a nice to know it, but they're not funding it. So you need to focus on what those stakeholders talk about. Right? The other aspects you need to do it is whenever you build a requirement, you need to make sure if a system implements this, is there a way for me to verify the system has that ability? Right? Often they talk about the testability of a requirement. Okay. So any requirement you write it needs to follow the 3C and a T criteria. Right. So let's take an example. If I kind of just say, hey, system should respond in a reasonable time. It's great, right? It's a nice non-functional requirement, but can you test it? What is a reasonable time? The reasonable time for me could be different than what is for you. For a one function that I'm trying to like it's access the information real time, the reasonable time might be a second or a millisecond, right? Versus, hey, I'm trying to pull a report. The reasonable time might be different, right? So if you're like it's doing a taxes, right? And if you're like it's going to your stockbrokers, right? The reasonable time to execute a stock is probably a second or a fraction of a second. The reasonable time to get my tax statement, I'll get you by end of January. That's still a reasonable, right? So the reasonable definition, right, could change person to person, or it could be a different from function to function, right? And that's why you need to like it's drill it down and says what is that definition means, right? And once you have that understanding, then you can just say, hey, is this requirement something that I can test it or I can verify that system is able to do that? Another aspect when you do the requirements is to make sure requirements are traceable. Okay. But that means is from the time a user gives it, right? You need to know who provided that information. So if there is any question, you can go back and trace it and ask them question clarification. But also on the implementation side, once you know what is the requirements, can you make sure you understand if I'm implementing certain functionality, it traces back to what requirement. And if I'm writing some test cases as a quality assurance person, what test cases are mapped to that requirement? What are the results, right? Entire thing has to be traceable. Now, how do I collect the requirements? Right? So there are certain things around it. So you can collect the requirements by like it's obviously there is an interview, how you talk to the people to gain that information. But how do you portray it? How do you compile that information? Right. One type of things you can do it as specification by example. The second thing you can do it as a use case diagram. You can do the context diagram, or you can do it a wire flow, the screen layout mockups, and the story mapping, right? Let's look at 3 of them today as we go through it, and the other 3 we'll do it like in the following weeks. So here is an example. When you're trying to write a requirement by specification by example, right? So when you talk about specification by example, it requires you to understand different scenarios and build out an example for that and get that validation. Remember what I talked about when you're doing a functional requirement. There are 3 aspects you need to think about. What is my input? What is my output? Right? What is business processing? But also I need to understand what is error handling, right? So here's an example, right? Where you can say, hey, based on the amount or the type of item people are purchasing it, I want a different shipping modes, right? So you start having a conversation. Let's talk about specific examples. And so what should happen in what scenarios, right? So if I can say, hey, I want to talk about a book, and that book is a physical book, and it needs to be delivered physically. Then you say, it's okay, if there is a physical material, you will go by mail, and the carrier you pick it up is United States Postal Service. Okay, so you understand it. Second aspect it comes in is, what if it is not the physical book, but in some sort of electronic, like whether it's CDs or DVDs, right? Then they say, hey, that could also be sent by mail, right? So some of those who were around Netflix when it started, it'll ship you the DVDs by mail for you to watch it. And then once you're done, you ship it back to them, right? The other thing is like, but what if I'm trying to like, it's kind of sell it out of big items like a TV, right? Which requires a delicate handling. And I need some sort of proof that the people received it. So they say, hey, if it's a TV, I want it certified mail, and I have a contract with FedEx. So I want that not to go to USPS because USPS also provides certified. But this is a big items, and I want those things to go to FedEx. Right? Now, if there are a software that I'm purchasing it, like if it's a CD, I want it to go through the mail. But I want to have ability for people to download. If it's download, there's no shipment carrier, right? I ship you an email, you download it and do that. So here's how you put an example, right? You can even put another column around if it is runs into a scenario where it fails it, what kind of error message you should display, right? So because if you try, let's take an example, right? So when you take a login screen, right? It depending on what kind of error message you have it may display a different error message, right? So if I try to just put only user ID, nothing for the password, and I try to click it and enter, it may say, hey, you must provide a password, right? Or it could be, I provided a password, but that password doesn't follow the standard, it's a wrong password. then it may get, instead of provide a password, they say, hey, your password and login ID is not correct. Right. So depending on the scenarios, you kind of build it out a table, talk about what are different scenarios and talk about specific examples. So that gives a lot more clarity instead of just saying, hey, depending on it, they will use a different carrier. Well, what scenario, what carrier will be used? So now, based on this, you can deduct the logic and start implementing it in the system. The second aspects of requirements is a use case diagram. Right? So a use case diagram, you will see a lot more like a stick in a circle figure. It's just what a lot of times people call it, right? But a use case diagram is essentially talks about how the system interacts with the different types of users, right? So in the custom creation, right? I might be a corporate customer user, right? And it says what all function I have access to it, right? It can say I can order it, an item, right? Or I can check out the status of an item, or I can set the payment types or payment information separate on the system, or I can access my account information and make any updates, or I can pull out reports, right? So each of those functions then becomes a bubble, talks about functions, and you put a user there and says, this user is able to access all these functions. But if I'm a pricing department employee, my functionality that I may do it is a different, right? So when you start building it out, this use case diagrams, it starts giving an idea who has ability to access what functionality and what kind of performance they will do or functions they will perform as part of it. Okay. And then collectively, then this gives you a view of all of the capability that system needs to have it in order to say, hey, I'm done with my work. Okay. The next one is around context modeling. Okay. So this one, it's kind of utilized to understand it is what are the business needs and the definitions that essentially enables you to implement the systems, right? It gives you an overview of the system in a business solution. Okay. It talks about what should be the overall scope for it. Okay. So let's take an example, right? Let's say if I'm building an online community, and then I'm trying to like it's draw a context diagram of it. So think around all the users who will be interacting with the system in an online community, right? So you're gonna have things like, let's say, a Facebook. It's nothing but an online community, right? So it'll have things like people will go and like it's put that advertisement that, hey, I want to sell this or I want to sell this, right? It becomes a Facebook marketplace. Then you're going to have a users who will be casually browsing it or looking for things to buy to say, hey, what all is available, right? So you can just say, hey, my community users will register it and the system will provide all the information to display, right? So if I just log in into my Facebook, right, there'll be a feed. It'll constantly push the information, right? Based on certain characteristics that I may have set it up. Okay. I will have on advertisers, right? So who will like its community will provide the slots for the advertisement, and then they will like provide a payment, right? So Facebook will take a cut, or Apple will take a cut whenever you're trying to purchase anything from Apple Store or things that are associated with it. Then you may have a content creators or a staff writers, right? Which will provide all of the content to that online community. And then they will get paid from the system based on their usage, right? Hey, I create, like think around, they're providing a newspaper for you, right? All of those propriety, whoever wrote it, they will get paid for. And then you have a accountant, right? So people who are managing finances, right? Because the money doesn't get generated from a thin air or magic here, right? Somebody has to validate it. So online community will provide it, how much payment they've done it. Based on that, they can create a financial report, right? And sometimes you get a W-2 or 1099 at the end of the year for doing those things. And it'll show it, hey, we made this much payment to this particular writer, right? We got this much payments from this particular advertisers, and so on. So let's take an example, right? So the way you do it, and I'm going to show an example of custom creations. Okay. So here's the context diagram for a custom creation. You take your stakeholder map, not the beneficiary, but the users of the system. Okay, whether it's a system or a people, you keep it in the context. And then you talk about what information they're going to get in and what information system is going to provide them. Right. So let's take in corporate customers, right? When they access the customer custom creation system, what they will access it for, right? They're going to do the orders, right? And then orders, they could be just creating a new order or essentially trying to like it's access the information about all the orders they may have placed it in the past, right? They may like it's to manage their account, right? So that goes as an input from a user into the systems. And then once they place the order, right? System enables them to retrieve that order information. So when I'm managing order and say, hey, give me a status of my last order, where it is. Then it'll give you back the information. Same thing for an account information. Hey, I want to change my payment. Show me what my payment is. That's set it in the system. Versus if I'm like, it's kind of a product person or department person, we're adding new products. All I'm doing it is I'm providing it new product information, then do it. Same thing from a vendor's point of view, right? Because they say, hey, some products, we may produce it. Some may be done by our vendors. So vendors will provide the information, hey, you can customize this, this, and this thing also. Then pricing department employees we talked about, right? The functionality is based on the customer loyalty and based on inventory, I want to be able to set the prices, right? So if you start like it's kind of noticing people's are or certain items are more popular as the customers order it, you may say, hey, you know what? I want to give a discount because you're ordering a popular. Or it could be other part of the demand and supply. If this particular item is more in demand, I'm not going to give a discount to that. I'll give a discount to the things that is not moving the inventory, right? So that's what they can do it. Same thing with the shipping. Now shipping is a system, right? So I will have an interface that enables me to create a shipment. And then I want to be able to get that shipment's current status so that when a customer looks for it, hey, where is my order? Where is my things that when it's going to be shipped? It gives you that information. Same thing with the payment, right? I'm going to provide a credit card. I want to be able to make sure, is it still a valid credit card or it's an invalid credit card? And I want to like it's going to do those things. So that's the context diagram. So here's what I want you to do it. I'm going to give everybody about 15 minutes. We drew a PHN stakeholder map, right? I want you to build a context diagram from that. Okay. So I'm going to give everybody 15 minutes. I'll leave this up here so you can see it and build your diagram such a way that we can pull it up here and we can walk through it. Okay. So 9:45, let's give 15 minutes at 10 o'clock. Okay. right across the recording. Any questions, Kushal or Girija?
No, sir. No, sir.
All right. I'm gonna pause the recording. So are you guys ready to share anything?
Yes, will I be able to share my screen?
Yeah, hang on. Let me stop sharing so you can see it.
Okay.
Go ahead and share your screen and walk us through it, what you thought.
Did you know multiple user?
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah, you know that. Yep.
All right.
Okay, excellent. All right, so when I was making this context diagram, I was keeping users specifically in mind, right? Since we want to focus on that for context. I had some questions, but yep.
Can you zoom in a little bit?
Yes. Oh,
There you go. Now it's easier. Okay, go ahead.
okay. Yes. Okay. Perfect. So, keeping users in mind. First was nurses. I was curious whether we wanted to break that down into managing physicians and NPs. Nurses would be focused on the patient management. Next, I had insurance, so they'd be working through eligibility, prior auth, treatment authorization, but I wasn't sure whether they needed system access to do that or whether billing, nurses would send over to billing and billing would manage that on their end, which takes me to the billing staff and billing management. And then the patient service coordinators, I put them down for like, okay, they may need to know authorization billing info. That way they can communicate that to the patients, maybe provider information so they can communicate that. And then keeping appointments in mind as well, because if they're the service coordinators, they may be providing transportation, they may be providing, or at least keeping the family, child, adult, whoever it may be, up to date with the appointment information and reminders. And then the health department, I put a question mark next to that because I wasn't sure if they specifically needed user access to the system, but if they did, my inclination was, okay, they're more there for the HIPAA compliance and the regulatory aspect as well.
So couple of things, right? And I think it's what you describe, it's great. Your diagram doesn't reflect that, right?
Okay.
So think of this way. What are the inputs? Let's take an example. The patient services coordinators will provide to the systems. And what kind of information system will provide them to do their job, right? So you talked about, hey, patient services may, like it's kind of enter into the system, their provider information, like it's what insurance they have it, right? Or what appointments they need to look through it. The system will provide specific appointment details or a confirmation that the billing information is set appropriately, right? So think of the input output, right? As I was sharing it earlier, right? Into the custom creations, right? What is the corporate users will ask it to the systems or try to perform in the systems, and what information they will get it out of the system.
Okay. So you're saying that information will be in the system. So if we're focusing more on the input output, the patient service coordinators would need just the login information. They put in their username, password, access that. Oh,
No.
okay.
So think of this way, like let's put the patient information outside. Let's just take the nurse's information.
Okay.
Right. So when you say a patient management, it's too broader. You need to tell it like it's what kind of information nurses will go into the system for, right? So for example, they may just say, hey, nurse is going to go to the PHN systems to ask for it is what is my next patient information? Where should I go the next for the service, right? And once the nurses perform that service, they will provide it information into the PHN system is these are the services I provided. right?
Dilip, I'm not sure everybody has read through the documents.
Right,
Um,
okay. So that's a good point, right? Did you guys read through the 4 documents that the Herschel stated, right? It gives you a picture of what kind of activities each one of them will do it, right? And that activity is important in terms of building this context diagram,
Okay.
right? So, again, think of it as what will I go to the system for, and what will system provide me that information? That's the context diagram. Right. So, if you may stop sharing.
Yes.
I mean, the actors are correct.
Right,
He has the actors identified, which are correctly identified.
right. So
Has anybody else has anything,
yeah,
to share? We can take a look at that.
yeah. So think of this way, right? This gives you a good, and should we have the pen? Oh, there it is. You don't know if it all, there it is. So if you look into it, right, it tells me what this particular. This particular user will interact with the system for, right? It is managing the product information. Do they need to get anything out? Probably not. They're not gonna they're gonna providing input to it. Versus this particular user, right? They want to set the price, but they will also generate a report on all of those things. Hey, how often this particular item is kind of ordered it? How often this particular customer orders it, right? Based on that, they will set the price and say, hey, for this customer, put this promotion. Or for this item, anybody orders it, whether this or any customers, since it is not getting too much in demand, we say we'll give you 20% off, right? So what they're doing is they're putting the information into the system. If anybody orders it, here is the price for them. But then also, system provides them the information of getting all the inventory, right? And it may be is that, hey, they may ask it, what was sold in the last 30 days, right? So they will still put a query, but they are beneficiary of the reports or information on a system to give them that, right? Same thing goes back to this one that we were talking about, right? So as a staff writer, I want to provide a content. I'll enter all the content. It's not saying is how I log in or how I provide the content. All it says that as a staff writer, I will provide the content. And based on the content I provided, I'll get the compensation. Right? Same thing for the advertiser, community users. So what is the key interaction the system is going to have with all of those users? And is that inward or outward and flow is what you are drawing in a context diagram.
So Dilip, in my example, for example, I put team service coordinator.
Uh-huh.
I did that. He will upload all the documents based on the written material that Herschel had sent.
Right.
And then the reverse, the system is pushing back the MAT form that, okay, this is how it will look, all the information.
Right.
Or maybe something that's missing there. So would that be a right example?
Right, that will be a good example, right? Is that, hey, I want to upload the document, right? And then I want to review the images, produce it, right? So in that case, upload will be going from a team players into the system, and the system is providing them image for the view.
Or like nurse is giving input as a patient information, she's getting output like immunization record of a patient.
Precisely,
And
right?
like,
But in that case, right, what it is I would not put the input about the patient records, right? I'll be put an input about the services I provided to the patient. And the system is giving a record of all of the historical data for that patient.
And insurance will be like output because they will get the billing or like amount
It could be, right?
be
So
out.
that's where you need to read the document, right? And then provide it, right? I'm just giving an example, right? You have to look and consume those documents to draw the diagram. It says, hey, what is the kind of functionality the system is looking for?
This gives very good understanding.
Oh,
It's a big picture, right?
Yes, you're reviewing each one of them.
So as a BA, right,
So-
when I have a document, I go through 3 times,
Yes.
okay? And you basically identify, highlight, basically, if you want to print it out, what this nurse will do, perform what type of activities they are doing currently.
Right.
Basically, just identify all those activities and
Yeah.
group them.
Yeah.
So that those functions needs to be available in the system.
Right.
Now.
This is where you need to start thinking around, right? This is how the use case diagram fits into it, right? So as you read through it, you start building this diagram. Right? And then you said, okay, if they have to perform all those things, are they getting the information or they're providing the information?
And the business, and then you present this diagram to the business user. And business user might say, oh, this activity can be done outside of the system, it doesn't have to be part of the system. So you take it out, basically, that functionality
Right.
out, because they will do it outside the system.
Yeah.
It could be some manual activity or it could be something else.
That this makes sense. So I
Yeah.
guess for Thursday, we'll be very prepared looking at the things like
Right.
he said, take printouts, draw your.
Yeah. Kushal, you had a question?
yeah. So you had mentioned with the patient management, that's too broad, right? So if I break that down, it would more be like their input would be, you know, the questionnaires, so like the parent questionnaires, the assessments that are happening, and then the output would be the documents that the patient service coordinators are keeping tabs of.
Could be, right?
Okay. Hmm.
So here's what I want to do. Okay? So now that you see how the things connected, for Thursday, this is what I would like you to do. Draw a use case diagram for PHN. Using that information
Based in the document.
based on the document, then update your context diagram. Okay, so you want to start connecting it, all of the description to the bigger functional. Remember we said, you review it and you start grouping the information. This is the grouping the information and building it a context diagram from that. And bring those for the validation, right? As Harshal pointed it out. You put all that information, draw it out, and then go back to the users and says, can you validate that for me? Right? So first thing for you for Thursday's homework is to build a use case diagram and the context diagram. After you finish reading those documents, analyzing it, and then bring it for confirmation to the user and says, is this right? Okay.
It's a question based on now you're reporting the bubbles and people who were the first stakeholders. While I was reading the documents, I came across the description of the managing physicians. And it said that, like you said, team service coordinator, when you're talking to a customer or in person or whatever, you open the system to look at his profile or your documents. Whatever. There was a mention that managing physician will also need to sign the document that is in medical application form. So in my head, I'm thinking that of course he will also log in because I see my application.
Again. So here's what I wanted, right? This is where it comes in. Right? Put together a diagram, put together specific questions, right? So remember what I said, prepare, conduct, and review. What you're asking it is part of the prepare. If I have to go ask Harshal that question, what do I need to prepare? You're reading the documents, right? So you refer, hey, in this particular document, you mention around managing physician needs to sign. Right? So you draw it and say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna put a managing physician here. And I'm gonna say they're gonna perform this functions. Right?
And then you.
And then you verify it with the user and says, is this right? And then they look at it, yeah, looks right. Or no. They don't do it that way. They need a printout, they need to sign it, somebody needs to scan it and upload it. I don't know how that implementation is, right? That one doesn't tell it how that implementation. So you need to, like, it's help them ask the question to understand how this thing is gonna work. All right, and in order to do that, you need to prepare. Read through it, right? Draw diagrams. And then show it as, okay, does this make sense? Let me make sure system allows user XYZ to log in, perform this functions. Is my understanding right? Right? And if he says yes, then you go into the context diagram. And then you build it and says, okay, now that they're doing this, they will come to perform this capabilities and they will get this information. Right? And again, remember all of this information. It's not arbitrary, right? We're gonna start talking about the process, which will give you a complete view of what is actually end-to-end happening. And how system plays the role into that end-to-end capability.
And the sequence as well.
And the sequences, yeah,
Who performs what, at what stage the activities perform.
precisely. Okay,
We are talking about that 11-page document on your.
no, there are other
Oh,
documents.
and there are probably 10 documents, right?
Okay.
So some of them are so I would say. Look at all documents, okay, some of them might be repetitive information, right? But you need to look at it basically, that gives you sort of new form.
Yeah, medical
That's where
application
things
form.
comes in, right?
What is
The 3C,
form, right?
correct, consistency and complete. That's the kind of things you need to start building it out. Do I have the whole picture? Do I have the details needed for it?
It's just a
Okay.
letter, so just ignore TX Texas.
Yeah, but I'm wondering what
Yeah.
this is like.
Just ignore TX, it's,
Any questions?
what is?
I wasn't sure this was.
This is letter of approval, right?
Yeah,
So
letter of
just
approval.
ignore
Okay,
DX
okay, I
and.
was, I just calculated my part of that. Oh.
The think of this way, right? As a user, they're providing a whole bunch of documents. That's, you need to review it. Analyze it, and then prepare the questions. And then conduct the questions in the meeting. Get that information and update your understanding in the picture behind. Any questions?
No, sir. Can I share mine?
Yeah. Let me stop sharing. Go ahead.
Is that the thing?
Can you? It's not visible. Can you zoom in?
Yes.
And it's too light. So it's hard to read it
Oh,
screen.
are you able to see or not?
Walk through it.
Okay.
It's very hard to see it here on the screen. If you can just
Okay.
walk.
Okay. So the employee part, employee is signing and like managing the record of the patient. And this, once they sign in and entering the software is giving the account details of the employee. And after managing the record, it gives the patient records to them.
So a question, who is employee here? Can you give me like? what
Like
role?
nurse or registration employee.
Okay, so you're grouping all of them into a single thing?
Yes.
I would probably separated out them as two different stakeholders.
So it's like the nurses separately and registration departments.
Yeah, I
Okay.
would.
If there is a registration department, yes. So that's something you need to figure out basically. You don't want to add something that business doesn't understand, right?
Okay. Then patients, they are signing in and giving the information and the software is showing the records. And account employees, they are giving like account information and getting back like payment confirmation. And
So-
OST.
I would recommend read the documents,
Mhm.
and right? I think what you're going in is based on the general things that you perceive the people will do it.
Okay.
That's a rule that you want to follow it as a business analyst. Don't
Uh-huh.
assume.
Okay,
From the stakeholder map.
Right.
That's the technique you wanna follow.
So remember, like it's in a custom creation
mm-hmm,
and the pattern, right? We build a stakeholder map. And then we,
okay.
anybody who's using the system, and then expanded that into the context diagram by providing the detail of what functionality they will perform, what input and outputs they will be getting it into it. So that's what I would go. And again, a lot of those things goes based on the documents that you have it. There
Mhm.
may be clarifying questions you want to ask it. That's what you want to prepare it. And then build it out the context diagram,
Okay,
right?
okay,
The sequence I would follow is I would create the stakeholder map first,
mm-hmm,
start building it out the use case diagram,
okay,
then I'll start putting the context diagram.
okay,
That will allow me to enrich the information as I go along, connect the dots.
okay, got it. Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, sir.
Okay.
Hmm.
I think it's an hour and a half since we started. So you can stop sharing.
Mhm.
Let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll let's dive into the process modeling. Okay. I'm gonna pause the recording.
I would like to know,
Go ahead.
what is the pH, and you asked me to read the context further, right? About the
In
about
the
duties they perform, yes. So may I know where it is? I am searching it. I cannot find it in the drive you shared.
It's a BCMS information folder.
I could not see that. I can see only brochure, children with medical handicaps, family handbook, ICA child, information brochure, medical access revised, parent questionnaire, permission to discuss with another adult, PHN nursing registration, POC September 13.
Yeah, and I think those are all the documents they want us to review. Like everything that's in that folder there, they want us to review all of those. That way we're able to come with questions and identify where we need to address things.
That's all the documents, right?
Yes.
They are not big documents, but you need to go through them. I think only one document is probably 35 pages, but other than that, everything else is small and supplemental.
Okay. It's not that what are the duties as nurses performing or how the registration employee doing the work. It's not about the detailed thing about each and individual.
Well,
It-
so but you have to read all those documents and connect the dots. Nobody's gonna tell you explicitly, hey, this is, think about it. If the user is telling you exactly what all needs to be done, why do they need you?
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So they're giving you all the business related information, and it's your job to essentially, through the conversation, through the analysis of those documents and through those interviews, to pull together what should be the functional and non-functional requirements and behavior of the system needs to be. Get that information from user and then give it to the team to implement that.
Oh, that makes sense. Thank you.
Quick question before we move on to module 4. I know earlier in today's class you had mentioned like UX and UI modeling. So although it may be beneficial to know platforms like Jira, for example, where we can do that, is that going to be expected of us as a business analyst to come with the mock-ups, whether it's high or low fidelity mock-ups of the systems?
Yes, and we'll talk in a couple of weeks around those markups and how you build it, what do you need to think about it, right?
Perfect.
But you need to connect all the pieces, right? So if you notice, Vishal, what we have started going, it is just give a problem statement, try to understand what exactly I'm trying to solve it. Then trying to put the stakeholder map, get the use case diagram, get into the context diagram, right? And along the way, you're starting building your questionnaires
Mm,
that you will ask it in order to get the clarity around it, right? We did a mock-up for custom creation in the last class. We'll start doing a little bit of process modeling. And we ask you to read through it and then start listing out the questions that you may need to ask it to get the holistic picture, right?
mm,
So this Thursday, right, you will bring it, all of the work that you've done it from the stakeholder map, from the context diagram, and the use case diagram, and then start visualizing and showing the understanding that as you read those documents, are you able to connect the dots?
oh, okay, that makes sense. Thank
You
you.
need to ask it to the business users, right? And Harshal will play the roles of the business users depending on the system so that we talk through it, right? Is to get that understanding, and then you take that information and you compile it and present that thing, right? That's how the business process and business analysis works,
And the story mapping and.
right? So along the way, we're gonna talk
Mhm.
about some more techniques as you go through it.
Okay.
Okay. So one of the, are you good with that, Kushal? Before we jump into the process modeling?
Yes, yes, that makes sense. Thank you very much.
So the next portion we're going to talk around is process modeling so that you can start connecting it, right? Think about it. We're giving you all those Lego puzzles and pieces. And we'll start in a couple of weeks, we'll start pulling it all together to create the document. Okay. So one of the other things as a business analyst, you need to think around it is the process model. Okay. So let's talk, what is the process modeling? Okay. So first, when we talk about process modeling, why it is important for the design and development of your solution and systems. So think around processes are overall business processes. This is how the business conducts, or this is how people perform things working for this particular business. Okay. So we talked about the functional capabilities, right? That what system should do it. But that's only part of things. Because people may still do activities outside that thing. And you need to understand the holistic end-to-end picture of what context when they're looking for what kind of information and what they will do with that information. And the system system is expected to perform those things, or somebody will perform outside, right? You need to have those understanding, right? Because if your functional requirements doesn't map to anything into any given process, why it's there, right? That we talked about the correctness, right? That's what comes in. Does it really belong in here? You're talking about this function, but none of the business processes is taking advantage of this function. So why do you even need it? Is it the correct to have that capability? That is what you need to start thinking about, right? Processes specify how the business is conducted, right? What rules they follow it, who performs it, what are the players involved into those things, okay? They don't manipulate the data, then they're not doing anything, right? And when I say it's manipulate the data, it could be read only, it could be read write, or it could be simple write. But if you have a process which doesn't do anything, then you should question is there even a process? Okay. So for a moment, I want you to think around how the business is run. Okay. And if you think about it, what businesses are doing, they're providing solutions, right? To specific sets of customer or specific sets of stakeholders. And they're making a money from those solutions. Okay. So all of the solutions that you talked about is built around the processes. Okay, so let's take an example. Okay. If you have an organization, right? What are they gonna do it? They're gonna have various processes, whether it's an HR, right? Whether it's compliance, whether it's a business related functions, they're gonna perform some processes, right? So think about process at the center. Okay. Everybody within that organization follows those processes to perform some activities, right? So all the processes used by the organization. Where this process is run, right? They're gonna have a locations. Right, so if you go into the PHN nursing, right, they talked about what locations, well, it's county X, Y, Z, and ABC. Some of them could be virtual now. It doesn't have to be a physical location, right? So when you perform a teledoc visit, that's a virtual. Nobody is going to a hospital or no doctor is coming to your home. It's happening virtually. But so essentially, where does all this processes run? At some locations, whether it's physical or virtual locations. Where are they implemented? They're implemented in your applications, right? Whether it's a website, right? It's as simple as this, right? So think about it. We are running a training process here, right? What locations? Two of you are physically in the room. And Kushal and Girija is virtually, right? So it's two different locations. It's done, right? How it is done? We're using Zoom application to conduct that. We're using PowerPoint to do it, right? So the process is implemented using applications. Okay. They use technology, obviously it's kind of, right? It could be any, right? It doesn't have to be a software computer technology only. Right? It could be as simple as, hey, it's going to be a mechanical technology. It could be a nurse, or the technology they do utilize that is essentially capturing a screen photo and uploading a document type of things. Okay. What is the purpose of processes, right? You have as a business, you have certain rules identified. Those are implemented or executed by the processes. Okay. So in order for a nurse to go see a patient, right? The patient must be first registered into the system. That's a process, right? They're putting the rules on that. Now, there are functional requirements, right? So I just explained it as functional requirement, right? The user must exist before it can be provided a service. It's implemented the process. And what did you do it? All the processes, they manage and manipulate the data. Data is the most important assets for any corporation. So it doesn't matter what, pick any corporation. It's all revolves around the data. And your processes are intended to manipulate the data. When I say manipulate, some of them is created, some of them is updated, some of them is deleted. Right? So that's how you need to think about the process ecosystems. Without that, none of those things exist. Right? Or think about it, process as an enabler to connect all of those solutions. Okay. So now let's talk about the business process model, right? It's essentially think around a business process as a step-by-step activities that will occur in order to accomplish that particular intention or need. Okay. So it could be around when you start building a process, it could be around improving a business. It could be around re-engineering a certain component of the business or automated it, right? So think of nowadays, right? Everybody kind of like it's so much big on AI, right? Artificial intelligence. Think about it, it's nothing but a tool. And a lot of companies are re-engineering their business processes now to utilize artificial intelligence. Instead of essentially doing it manual step, now they can say, hey, you know what? People used to read all the documents, print it, read all the documents, summarize it, and upload the summary for somebody to review it. With the AI, you're re-engineering and says, okay, I'm going to upload all the documents and let that compile it and summarize it for me, and then I'm going to just review that, right? Performing the same function, but you are like just essentially utilizing that, right? You must have seen it when you go to the doctor's office, right? Now all they do it is they just record after you finish the visit, they just record the memo. What you don't see it is in the patient room, doctor talks to you, make some notes, but when they go back to the doctor's or nurse's station, they actually do a voice recording. And that recording now what in the past you used to do it is somebody will listen to the record and transcribe it into the text, upload it to do that, right? Now they're re-engineering those processes using AI and says, you know what, I'm going to do a voice recording. It automatically going to convert into speech or text. It's going to summarize based on certain modeling and certain rules, and going to attach that as a notes, right? Because now if you go into, let's say your MyChart or whatever the app you're using it to see it, there will be a patient visit summary. And it's going to be available. Earlier, it used to take 3, 4, 6 days to appear. Now it appears within an hour after you finish it. Okay. Nothing but re-engineering the processing or automating some of the existing business. Okay. So what actually is the process modeling? It's nothing but a technique to show it what steps will happen, what activity will happen, by whom, and how they are related. Okay. And it's nothing but a visual representation because it's easier for a human to consume the visual representation than reading it through a long document. Okay. So there are certain notations people use it, right? So there is a business processing modeling, and there's a whole bunch of tools that you can use it. But essentially, here are the notations that you need to be aware around it, right? So the one at the top is essentially start and end of a process. Okay. The one in the middle, it talks about the actions. If you have to make certain decisions, a lot of times you say, hey, based on the input, if they do this, they go this path. If they do this, they go this path. So the decision making shows the yes, no string, right? Sometimes it's also now, it could be a complex and says, hey, it's not simple yes and no. It's based on certain value. If value is this, do this path. If value is this, do this path, and so on. Okay. And then the last thing is around the related processes. Right? Sometimes it's a very complex to present it, right? So you use those connectors and then show it, hey, this part is now its own process. And sometimes you will see another notation, and I don't know if it's here or not. You will still see it something like this, but it'll have 2 arrows inside. So instead of just one line, double line, right? So it'll look something like this. What it talks about is that thing it now breaks into a sub-process. It has its own process map for it. Okay. It also contains what is known as a swim lanes. Okay, so swim lanes is essentially a participant who plays the role into it. So if you think around it from a overall end-to-end business process around, let's say PHM, right? There'll be different players, right? So there'll be nurses, there will be registration staff, there will be a clinic. Each will perform a different role, but it's overall end-to-end business processes, right? So think around it. All of you probably have filed the taxes, right? Sometime in your life, right? So if you think about a process of filing a taxes, involves multiple players, right? First, I as a user collect all the documents and start that process, right? Now, I can be preparer also, or I can go to my CA or H&R Block or somebody to go and prepare that for me, right? So I could collect all the documents, give it to that person. That person has its own function, right? They will go and compute whatever the tax is based on that. And then they will come back to me and says, show me, and says, okay, this is your tax return looks like. Do you want me to file it? Right? So then say yes, then it goes back to that person who will then file it. Then it goes to IRS, who will like it's receive it, and they accept it, or they reject it, or they cause an audit. Right? So based on that, there will be a decision, accepted, rejected, or audited. Based on that, there may be some follow-up actions. If not, if it's an accepted, right, they will send the confirmation back to the CPA, who will turn confirmation back to you and says, your tax is done. So think around, there are multiple actors played, and each actor will have their own swim lane. That's what the purpose of sim is, how different actors play together in order to accomplish the business outcome. Okay, so here is an example. Okay, so if you work in a corporate world, right, sometimes you have to travel it from the business perspective, right? So you may incur expenses. So the business may have a process and say, okay, here is how we capture and approve expenses on behalf of business that somebody might have done, right? So this process talks about, right? So notice a few things, right? There are three different lanes: employee, supervisor, and administrator, because there are three different players who will play it and roll into it, right? So how does the overall expense claim process start, right? So an employee who has an expense to submit it, they will start a process, right? They fill out a form. Once they fill it out, right, there will be at some point, there will be an action they have to take it to say, submit this, right? So when they submit it, it goes to the supervisor for approval, right? So supervisor will receive it, they will review it and say, is this a valid or not? Is employee eligible to get a reimbursement for this expense or not? Right? So they will have their own corporate guidelines around what to approve, what not to approve it, what is valid, what is the limit valid, and so on, right? So based on that, they will look into it. Is this expense report valid? If it is, then they will say, I'm going to let it go further in the processing. But if it is not, I'm going to reject it and let employee know your expense is not approved. Okay. Now, if they say it's the valid, right, they will essentially take that and say it's an authorized expense, right? So at that point, it will go into somebody has to write the check, right? The manager just approved it. So it goes to the whoever writes the check, which typically in your administration or in your payroll, HR, whatever the department that function lies into it, right? They get that. They essentially log that expense that, hey, this expense was approved by this manager, done by this employee for this much amount. So they log into it. And then they give it into your payment systems, right? And that payment system essentially cuts the check, right? Either electronically sends a payment or gives a physical printout check and then sends a notification to employee that your expense is approved, the check is in the mail, right? Or we already made a payment to your credit card or whatever that is, right? That's the entire process, right? So this gives you a step-by-step instructions, right? What happens it from start? What flows it, right? It could be one flow. Second flow could be all the way here, right? So that's my business flow. That's how you draw a business process diagram. Now there are certain tools that you can use that, right? So there is a Spondro, which is a freeware, or there's a Lucid Chart, which is a freeware, or some corporation uses Visio, but Visio is an expense, so it's kind of part of Microsoft Office. So, and then a lot of others have a specific tools, the companies may have it that essentially enables you to take those process and implement, right? So that's called a business process modeling tools. There's tons of them, right? But the freeware that like we talked about is there. And as a business analyst, depending on the company you are, they may require you to do the final documentation to the process modeling tools. Or you can just simply do it in a Lucid chart, have interaction and give that, okay, here is the updated diagram, and then go implement it. So how do I go ahead and create a business process, right? So what steps I need to follow? Okay. So this gives you a guideline of this is how you go about understanding a business process and drawing it and getting a confirmation around, right? So if I have to draw it, right, what I need to understand is what triggers this. What is the starting point, right? So I need to understand who initiates this process, right? And this is where you have a discussion with your context diagram, with your use case diagram, sitting back to the user and says, does the nurse start this process? Does the patient start this process? Or does the clinic start this process? Who starts it? Who performs that initial activity? So you want to understand that. You want to understand, make sure that is in the scope of the solution that you're trying to do it, or in the scope of the overall business. Okay. Then once you do that, as part of it is you need to understand what are the events that triggers the processes. So when does it get started, right? So I was showing you this expense report. Well, when does this process start? Right? The thing is, hey, this overall process starts when employee fills out submission form. Well, is that the case? What about is employee needs to first get in a pre-approval even to do this work? Right? Don't know, right? So that's where you need to start having a conversation is what is the triggering event that is going to occur that one? Okay. What data is going to be associated with that when this event gets triggered? Okay. And then what kind of events it's going to monitor the performance of this, right? So in that whole expense report, right? I want to like it's be able to see it at any given point. Where is in the whole process my expenses, right? What is the event? And some of them triggers it, right? Your manager rejected your expense. It's going to start those notification, right? So you need to understand is what are the things that kicks off those processes. Okay. And for each point, you need to understand it, which lane it belongs into, right? Identify what will be a happy path, what will be an exception path. So if you look into this one, a happy path is the long path, where everything gets approved. The exception path says, hey, it got rejected. But it could be is, hey, I got rejected, oh, because it was not correct amount. I mistyped it. I need to fix it and I need to resubmit it. What is that flow looks like? Because it's not here, right? So you need to understand what is those triggering events. And then for each one of them, what is the happy path? Okay. And then when you do a happy path, you need to make sure which lane it belongs into it. What is the next step? What is the normal and exception path? Right? So normal path is when it approves it and goes to the next step. Exception path is when it gets disapproved, what step it goes to, right? You need to start mapping it out, all of those things. As you go through it, you may have to start like it's mapping, hey, there is another path, there is another path here, there's another one, right? So the conversation and the questions that you prepared to ask those questions helps you to define those paths and draw it, okay? And then they may say, hey, once it goes approval, it goes to whatever the process administration does it to send the payment. Well, that's an indication that there is a sub-process. And then you need to follow the same steps for that sub-process. What triggers in a payment request? How does that get processed and approved? What characteristics you look for it to say that it's a valid payment or should it be rejected, right? All of those things becomes part of your process modeling. Okay, so let's do an activity. Okay, so I'm going to do it in a custom creations. Okay, so the first thing you need to start understanding it is from your context diagram and your stakeholder, right? So when I look into customs creations, discard. Let's just say it stayed here for a moment, right? So when I look through it, this one, right, I need to start understanding is what is the business processes, right? So I can look at this and I can also go into here. Right? So if you look into it, they started talking about some processing things here. Right? So what was the first thing? What is the triggering event? When what are the processes, right? So if I look into my context diagram, right? Let's take a simple example, right? So there is a customer who will be able to manage orders, right? So managing order comprises of multiple things, right? One is creating a new order, right? So then you say, okay, the overall process is to create a new order. Well, let's talk, what is a triggering event? When does this happen? Well, when a customer wants to customize something in order from us. Great. So now I understand it is a customer initiates that triggering event, right? So I'll start drawing it into that. So let me do one. Auto hide it. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and change the layout. Okay. So I need to start thinking around the different lanes, right? So what they'll do it. So I'm gonna draw it. Anything that happens at, let's say I'm gonna start with a customer. This one. Okay. Right. So this is my corporate customers, right? Because that's where I'm gonna do it, right? Now, is the company is gonna start? Probably not, right? It's somebody working at that company, right? So I'm gonna just say it's my corporate customer user is the one who starts it, right? To keep it. Right, so they are the one who will start it, remember. Now, we need to follow the notation, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and say, hey, let me see it as notation. So this is, I'm gonna create my starting point, right? And my process is, I'm gonna save it. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and create. I'm gonna go ahead and create this. This is going to be an ordering an item process. Okay. So they're going to start it. They're going to say it's what are they going to do first? right? So let's play a role, right? So as I go through it, a custom relation, right? I'm gonna be a person who's gonna be playing a VA role, and Herschel is gonna be my user, right? And then we just say, hey, I wanna do this process modeling, right? So they know it, custom creation allows an order, right? So I'm gonna say, so Herschel, thank you for taking time. I wanna work with you today to understand the overall process of how the ordering occurs into the custom creation, right? So as a employee of a corporation, which is kind of signing it to create a custom items from custom creations, right? I'm gonna go ahead and place the order, right? So you indicated that all the order is gonna be initiated by somebody working at that corporation. So when they do it, will they have, what is the first thing they will do? Do they log in or they browse it? What do they do first thing?
So they need ability to search it, so they will be able to search. So,
But do they have to log in at that point?
Yeah, it needs to be secure, right? So-
Okay, so the first step they will do it is they will log in, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and just say it. First thing they're gonna perform is login.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna connect it. So the first thing they do is log in. Once they log in, what is the normal thing that they will do at first?
So normal thing that I visualize is they will end up on some type of their company dashboard where they can see
Mhm.
their past orders. What they have ordered in the past, as well as some basic information about the company.
Right, but let's, if you don't mind, let's
Yeah.
just stay focused on the ordering process, right?
Okay, yeah.
So let's say I want to order it, right?
Sure,
So
so
once I
we-
log in,
Yeah.
right? What is the next thing I'll do it if I'm coming with the intention to order an item?
Yeah, so they will search, they need to be able to search for the products, what is available in the catalog.
Okay,
And pick the product.
okay, so they will search it.
Yeah.
Right, so. Um. So they will search. Now. When they search it. The one scenario is they will find what they're searching for. Right, let's say I want to order.
Yeah.
A customized pen, right? And I'm searching for a pen and find it. And then I'll perform a happy pen. But what happens if I don't find it?
If they don't find it, obviously, then they don't have a product, then in the catalog, then. They would expect some type of information indicating that there is no matching product
Okay,
in the system.
so you feel that that's good, that's a decision customer has to make it. Depending on what they find it, right?
Yes, so if they find the product, then obviously they will select the product, choose the product and customize it.
Okay. So it's gonna be, if I'm gonna find a product.
So if they don't find product, they will go back and they will request or like.
If they don't find the product, right, I mean, they will just get some informative message, or they can search again.
Okay.
So, for different product.
Okay.
Or
So-
it could be just stop at the point, because there is nothing to customize.
Yeah, if it is S, it will go with like the
Okay, so
order, and if it is no, then.
we're gonna run out of space in this one. That's why you like the Lucid board and everything, because you can stretch infinitely. In the PowerPoint, you may not be able to do that. Let's say it. And then this could go back to. Search. Okay, this is the case when. They didn't. Find it. Right, so I'm gonna go ahead and. The next one. No. If they find it, then the customization will start, right?
Yes, so they need to be able to upload the logo, they need to identify the placement, where we're gonna put it on exactly on the product.
So. Logo.
Identify the placement of the product.
Let's see if it allows me to go beyond it. Space. What do they do it after identifying placements?
Now, one thing we want is the ability to save, basically the product, because they may not have the right logo at the time, so they might be able to come back and,
Oh. So even before uploading the logo,
uploading the logo, they may not be ready for order at this point. So they will have the order, everything ready, basically, but they can come back tomorrow and order.
okay,
So.
so you identify
Basically,
placement,
save
everything,
the item,
and then save the or items.
save the order.
So. Is the save item is always, what if I'm ready to order at the same time? Do I have to save it or can I proceed it without?
No,
saving?
they can proceed there. Because they can have multiple items as well, right? So they
Right.
might select a pen, they might
Okay.
select a t-shirt.
Okay,
So they will go through the process in order at the same time.
right, so then that means. That means there's gonna be a decision, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Add another item, that will be seen.
Okay. I'm asking them to make a decision. And then if it is yes,
Then they should be able to search it, right, at the time, so.
Right.
So the product. Okay.
go ahead and. This says yes. If it is yes, then I'll do that. If no. If I'm ready to order. Ready to order.
So the system should ask them for payment
Right.
details
So,
at this point.
so at this point, and I'm still drawing only the happy path, and we'll come
Yes.
back to the unhappy path in a moment. Let's just continue our trend on. I'm ready to order. So I'm just saying. At this point, the payment will happen if I'm ready to order, right?
Yes, so payment processing will kick in.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
So that could be a separate process.
Right, so. I'm gonna go ahead and. Process payment. But that'll go to the payment department, right?
Well, it will.
Processing payment,
Once they make the successful payment.
okay. So, but then when they're ready to order. The next step is paying
getting the
for it,
Payment details, yeah.
okay. So, okay, and then once they enter. Okay, so. What I'm gonna do it is. I'm gonna go ahead, and this is where I'll start using connectors, right? So you can see it's like if you're drawing it into Lucid chart, you can automatically fall into the second swim lane. But here we don't have that, so I'm gonna go ahead and use the connectors to do that. Right, and I'm gonna put that this connects to number one. Okay. Just remember, like it's going back into this, right? You had a swim lane. Right, it's employee, so this is the one, I'm gonna draw the second swim lane into the second slide. So you can bring it up into a single view. Okay, so this one, I'm gonna make it my. Right, so payment department. Right. So in this case, though, when they enter the payment. This is where they're coming into it. Right. So this is where my connector comes into it from there. Now, once they enter the detail, is somebody looking at that manually, the payment? And then it, or do you have a gateway directly to the payment,
Yeah.
For the
system
bank
needs to
to-
accept the online.
online payment?
So
Okay,
it could be credit card, it could be through bank details,
okay,
so there are different choices that they should be prompted.
okay. So that this one entering payment details could be multiple ones. So.
But that could be a choice of payments, right?
Right.
So at that point,
Okay, there could be choices. Okay. So that means I'm gonna make it,
just to keep things simple, we can accept either credit card or bank details.
okay,
ACH, those two.
right, okay,
No PayPal,
so,
no Venmo or anything else.
so my payment system. Will check it if it's a credit card. Right, so that's where it's connected. And the output will be. Yes. And. No. So my, yes. Yes. What happens is if it's credit card, do you have a gateway that you connected to it?
Yes, so it should be a gateway online payment, right? So enter credit card details and
Okay.
it should be able to install it.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna just go ahead and say is let's say that this payment is processed through that. So if it is a bank account, you payment it through ACH processing.
Yeah.
And then,
Now, they need to get the confirmation via email.
so when they do the processing payment, then does it go back to the customer to say it's, yes, my payment is valid, submit the order, or it automatically submits the order at this point?
So they need to, they need to see the confirmation screen.
Okay,
So confirmation, basically, they need to see the confirmation for the order.
okay. Now, one thing that we potentially didn't talk it before processing the payment is once I'm ready to order, do I have to select the shipping method? Because that may determine. What is
correct.
that?
Shipping is always the enter payment detail, right? So they need an option for shipping as well at the same time.
Okay, so but if I ordering, like it's, let's say I'm ready to submit the order at this point. So will it ask me the shipment detail and shipment method
Yes.
first before taking me to the payment? Or because-
It needs to, because payment is dependent on.
Okay.
What type of shipment.
All right, so we missed a step here,
Yeah.
right? So right after ready to order, this one essentially goes to the shipping,
Shipping.
getting me that shipping information,
Right.
right? Selecting the shipment method and then asking for
Yeah.
payment. Okay. So that means is we need to update this process to reflect that thing, right? So if it is there, right, I'm gonna go ahead and actually
Select shipment, yeah.
select shipment option.
Yeah.
Right? And then, so at this point, you're not like just giving them an option so that you can price it out.
That is,
Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and then based on this, enter payment
Yeah.
details, right? So, but the shipment option based on what I selected, somebody has to tell me how much it will cost, right?
well,
Is
system
it
should-
always fixed or is it dynamic based on the weight and everything?
I think system should auto calculate the shipment based on the number of items ordered and
Okay.
what they have. What is being configured in the system for the product.
Okay,
So if it's a pen, obviously that shipment price will be lower than the t-shirt or.
okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and create a separate lane for that particular aspect.
Yeah, that's just a calculation part, right? So that could be a whole other process, business
Right.
process that we have to tackle. At this point.
Right.
But as part of the ordering process, right? So this is what
Okay,
the system will auto calculate as the shipment and the payments, what they need to pay.
okay, so then you're personally seeing it, there is another step here,
Yes, because it goes, it ties to the configuration of the product as well.
right?
That could involve the weight and everything else, basically, but that's
So-
the whole other process.
Okay.
And then that could be part of the,
Okay, so I'm gonna.
Yeah.
No, Herschel, so it has a. Oh, there it is. Perfect.
that's a different group that configures that, so that's,
Right. So, but the process wise, it's still within the consumer space that the order will happen at
yeah.
this one happens. And then once it calculates shipping cost, then they will enter the payment details, right? Okay. So once it then enter payment details, it goes to the payment processing. Once the payment is done, then they will essentially,
Receive the confirmation of the order.
right. So they will go. And both will go into number 2 here, right? And then here. Six. Number 2 comes here. Right. Now, again, remember, I'm capturing it, so it might be a messy. And then eventually I'll it's kind of refine it and then do that, right? But let's say this is what's happening, right? So at this point, I'm gonna just say it's still a corporate customer, right? I'll make it easier. Right? And they. So once they come in, right? They get a receive in. Confirm order. Is that what they will do? Because once I got the payment, you said that
Yeah.
you want it to be displayed back to the customer
Yeah, for final confirmation.
for final confirmation, right? So, and then,
The submit order.
right, and then they will do the submit order.
Yeah. And there should be one more step, receive email confirmation.
When they submit the order, they will receive the confirmation, right?
I mean,
So,
it will be on the system, but they need to get confirmation.
they will get the confirmation by email.
And
Okay,
at this point, the process starts.
right,
For
okay. So this one ends, however, there is a missing part, right? And then we still need to talk through it. Let me put the end flow here.
Yeah.
Right? This one, this ends here. Or it's once they submit the order, the shipment needs to kick off, right?
Well, that's a whole other process for shipment. So as part of
Right.
the customer ordering process, so this is the steps they will go
Okay.
through. Now shipment will receive it, yes, that's.
Right, but I want to just say it is, right? So.
Yep.
Right, so when they submit the order, they go into the shipment process.
Yep.
Okay. So this is the internal order
Yep.
process, right? So if you think around it, right? So thank you, Herschel, for your time. We'll capture it, we'll refine it, and we'll fill in the details, right? So you can do it like it's pause here, right? Now you know that there are 2 swim lanes. right? The corporate customers and the payment processing department, because those sort of happen real time. But it also kicks off two other processes that actually comes into the play, right? One is calculating shipping cost, and the other one is doing a shipment processing, right? So this one and this one, shipment process. So for those two, you have to go through the same steps that I went in for the order to get through that. And they may involve multiple swim lanes. Okay, that's just one process, right? Now we think around it, that is, I have to draw a map for ordering, right? But what if I want to cancel an order? What process I follow, right? What if I want to check status of the order? What process I will follow, right? What if I want to, like, it's kind of pull up as Herschel pointed, right? There's a dashboard. I want to see what all I've ordered in the last 3 months. What is the process I will follow, right? Now, one thing which we didn't capture it yet, right? But at each point, right? You need to think around when I log in, what information I'm providing it, right? When I kind of upload the logo, what is the information? What format I'm providing it? How big is I'm providing it? Do I need to have a different logos? I don't know, right? What happens like it's when I save the item, right? Does it save as a temporary order? What kind of data it's saved? How long it should save it? All those questions comes into it. All of those things gets into the business rule, right? I'm not ready to order, right? And then like it's at that point, I maybe just be able to just save it, right? If I'm not ready to order. Let me just save order. Right? This is my no flow. But then I have to worry about now different processes. What if I want to come back to the previously saved order and then
How do
continue?
I retrieve it?
How do I retrieve it? How do I add it, right? All of those processes and what steps will happen it. You need to ask the question and draw this map, visualize. You need to start putting the data elements with that. At this step, what data I needed, what happens to that data? Remember what we said is the processes manipulate the data. Is this a retrieval? If so, from where? If this is upload and save, where it saves, what information it uploads it. All of those things you need to map it up. Okay.
Can you flip to that process that you had that diagram in the PowerPoint?
This one?
No, the previous one, right? What goes in the process, right?
Oh, this one?
There was one more diagram, I think you had like overall process in the middle and.
Yeah, that manipulation
Oh.
data, the
Yeah,
orange,
center,
yeah.
right? Yep, so
Yeah.
all the business rules, data, functional requirement, that's kind of like a part of the process. So what you are doing is right now, building parts and pieces of what's supposed to be your part of your requirement.
Right.
So if you look at each box in the process, that you have to drill down into
Right.
each boxes.
So this one, who starts it, who interacts with it, right? Business rules is essentially what rules I need to apply, right? The login, they must be logged in. Well, that's a rule, right? Then functional requirements, they will be able to select a shipping option. Right? When I select the shipping option, it's going to manipulate the pricing data based on certain rules that the business has set it up, right? Like it's, if I'm an Amazon Prime customers, my shipment cost is 0. Unless I want it within 3 hours, then I need to add it, right? So all of those things, part of the data comes in. The business rule comes into the play to do it. That. Right? So as you go through it, you collect it, you question it, right? You notice it like it's, as I walk through it, he was trying to like it's going to the different direction of dashboard, right? I kind of said, it's a good idea, but let's hold on, let's finish this thing and come back, right? So it's also an important things to learn it is how do you kind of keep the conversation on the track so that they don't go it, right? So at that point, if you notice it, I flipped into a closed questioning. It says, what happens next? Do they do this or do they do this? Right? Versus when I started it, I started with the open questions. What will happen once they log in? Right? That's when he said, oh, they will go search. Because I don't know what they wanted it to do. So that's an open question. But then I narrow it down again. What if they don't find the item? Yes, no. What happens when this no happens? Right. So I kind of change my questioning, whether it's open, context, confirmation, verification, right? It's right. Paraphrasing, all of those techniques that we talked about. I used it in order to help me to build this one. Right. Now that I have built this one, I can continue to verify it, looking back at the documents that he may have provided and says, is this wanted? If not, I'll go back and ask more questions around it. Right? So now when you talk about completeness of it, if I don't know how to calculate shipping cost, that will be incomplete, right? So I'll have in the next session, right? I'll say, okay, now that we're done with this, let's talk about how the shipment gets calculated. Then I'll start putting a process. Do the same steps, pull that detail, and then connect that to the here. Then I'll do the same thing for shipment processing. Right? Then it gives me a holistic view of what it takes it to order a new item. Then I'll have a separate path which says, okay, the start, log in still, but instead of search, retrieve my previous order or previously saved items. So that will be another flag that unhappy path goes in or different scenario that comes into it. So different triggering events will drive me different processes. Okay. Any questions on this one?
So in one slide you showed like there were like 3 people, like
Right. This one,
here,
right? You're talking about
Yeah.
this,
employee, supervisor, administration. So in our case, like custom creation, it will be the
2.
customer who want, and then
At this point, it's only 2, right? Because one is a customer user and the other one is my payment processing department, because they both needs to be involved. Third could be a shipping, right? When I expand this,
yes, everything is yes.
right? When I expand this shipment process, that will become my third lane, right? And so I'll replace this with the actual process and I'll just show it that lane going into it, right? Sometimes it's too big and becomes a complex. So usually you break it down, right? That's why I said, oh, this one is shipment process. So now in this case, I have only 2 lanes. But when I go to shipment, I may have another 3 lanes, right? If I put everything into a single place, it becomes too complex for people to understand and follow a lot of things. So you break it into small pieces, which is more manageable to do that. But there's nothing wrong. You can do either or. You can break into small pieces, or you can put a 10-lane swim lanes and walk through that path. That's either one is okay.
Or will it be inventory, like customer inventory, because inventory people are giving all the information.
Right. So
That's a whole other process.
So that's a different process, right? Inventory management, right? What happens to add an item to the inventory? Or what happens to inventory when a customer orders certain things, right? Also, there is an aspect, right, that we didn't talk at, right? Is about what is the return process? If I printed a wrong logo or that, they need to return it. What happens to those items in the inventory? Is it discarded, shredded away, or can it be reused? I don't know. Right? So those kind of questions that you ask it as you start doing it is, will you ever entertain the return of the order? Or once they process the order, that's it. You can't get a refund. You cannot do that. Because you customized it, right? Because that You cannot sell it to somebody else. It's specifically to them.
Yeah, the general rule of thumb is you simplify the process, right? Don't mix up too many things, otherwise it's very difficult to read this type of diagrams.
Yeah.
You don't want to mix up shipping and this process, because shipping is completely different department, they are handling it. You can just have arrow, as Dilip said it there, shipping process and just follow, don't go in details, how they handle.
Right. Okay. Any questions? So that's all about the process modeling, right? And we'll talk about exercise in a moment. But like there are a couple of things, right? I want you to connect it. So think about it that you did a stakeholder map. From there, you started doing a use case. What all functionality that who will perform what. Then you put together a context diagram, right? And then you started going, it's okay, based on a context diagram, a user is probably going to want to order an item. Let's talk about that process. And you started getting into the detailed process diagram, right? Now, as you go through those process, right, there are certain additional things that you will start doing it. And one of the things would be UI/UX mockups, right? So think about it like it's login, right? So you talked about in this process, then I'm going to log in, right? You can say, let's just do a layout, a really low model layout, what the login will look like. Simple. Do I need to put a username and a password only? Or do you need to put a username, password, and the corporation that I'm trying to do it? So what is my login screen is going to look like? Like, so you ask a question, so you draw a low fidelity and says, is that going to look like this? Okay. Same thing like it's when they say it's okay, now I want to search it. Well, what is the search screen will look like? What kind of information I will put into it? And says search is going to give you a result. It's going to display a whole bunch of things. Well, there are two ways, right? I look for a specific item and shows me only one. Or I look for all the pens and it shows me all the pens along with the price. And then I click on the detail to see it what it is. So there's still different things, right? We talked about the process that this is what's going to happen. But exactly how that will be appearing to the users is where you do a UI/UX mockups and screens. Okay. So then you also do it a page flow or a wire flow diagrams. So what happens when I click on the search? What page it goes and what should it display it? When I do this, what should it display, right? So the entire flow. So you draw a process model. Now you need to convert it into what the users will see, right? Because user will not go back and forth, right? Your process is going back and forth between different swim lane. But as a user, as a login, what will be my experience when I order an item? The whole end-to-end. What screen I will see it, what, and we can start mapping it out, those things, into the page flow diagrams. Okay. Any questions of how all those pieces get together, connected?
Yeah, so when you're doing the business process model, like just in the example that we took, where would this come? Would this come for everything? Like, for example, Harshil said that we do shipping different, this different.
For every screen, for every users that you do it, but you need to flush it out, right?
It's a full-time job, right? So you're gonna take a one process and you're gonna
Break it into
This
pieces.
will talk about user stories and story maps. Sure. How
Right.
do we create that based on the process maps and everything else?
Right. So that's a whole session. I don't want to start a new that, right? But I wanted to get you all the pictures and connecting pieces, right? Why it's important? Because as you start thinking about the questions that you put in, right? You need to start thinking around all of those questions, because here, the reason why we broke it down into small pieces because so that you can get the context, right? But when you go in the real world, right, you will not be going back and forth to Herschel 10 times. Hey, I drew a story map, validated. Now let me go a process map session with you. Let me go get the data map with you. Let me go get a different map for the. No, you have to be there working with them, collecting all those information as you're doing it. And then you go back and farm up everything into different visuals and then go back once time to validate it.
Yeah, a lot of time we do the process
Map.
exercise right with the users. So we start drawing out on the board basically
Yeah.
or the Visio. Put one box there, does it make sense? Start connecting the dots and come up with the process.
Right. And then like it's while you're doing, right? You can just simply go it and say, hey, when I did the login, right? What kind of information they will enter it here? So you ask right there, they're gonna log in? Well, what kind of information you think that they're gonna enter it? You just jotted down all of that. Right? Then when you go into the search, then you say, what information they will search it.
Now,
Right.
login is more common, right? So anybody who logs into the system, you will have login, so sometimes you may not.
You may not have to go into detail.
So you drill down to how do they work, like searches and you focus on that particular process most of the time.
Right.
Yeah.
So as you go through it, right, you build it out of comprehensive things. And then that becomes your input into when you start organizing, it becomes a complete map of the system. Right. So we'll give you a couple of templates so you can see all those examples as you go through it, right? But the way we want to start thinking around is build a context diagram, build the use case diagrams, build the process flows, and connect all of those things, right? It may appear that, hey, we are doing this activity separately. You may still end up doing activities separately, but when you build the actual artifacts, you bring it all together into a single view for them to do it. Okay. All right. Any questions so far? Okay. So I'm going to give you like it's now 15-20 minutes to draw the use case diagram for the PHM, right? So we talked about briefly about the context diagram, right? You know who the actors are going to be in the PHN, right? So take 15 minutes, draw the first cut. I understand you may not have read it through all the documents completely, right? But let's start getting it because part of the reason is I want to start having a discussion in terms of what all processes you think you need to map it out or build it for the PHN, right? Once you get that, then you can have a session like this. Right? As I mentioned, like even.
Let me tell you the important document, right? That you need to have an understanding for PHN. So that will help you guys get started. So that's a family handbook for children with special needs, right? That's one document. And up to 12 pages. I would strongly recommend you read it. And there is a PowerPoint, I think that will also help you understand the PHN processes. So those two documents combined.
So what you're talking about, Herschel,
Family handbook for children. Yeah.
this one,
That's the one.
okay,
To 12 pages. I think that it's good to if you go through everything, but if not. Then up to 12 pages is
Right.
good to get understanding of the PHN. And then Bureau for Children with Medical Handicaps, that's another document. That's a PowerPoint slide that talks about specifically
right,
how the
how it's funded, how it helps it,
who does what type of thing as well, and so forth. Like
Right.
what is treatment program? And
there is a forms, right? That gives you all the details of what forms they would like it to automate it and those things.
So those two documents are very important. I mean, other documents are important as well, but those are the two
Yeah.
you want to start.
So then right now you want us to create a business process model?
No, what I want you to do it is if you go back into this, right? So we talked about the use case diagram, right? So think about who the users are, what functions they will perform it into the system.
And you can refer to the proposal, right? There is a section on the proposal that talks about who does what. At a high
Right.
level, you can use that as a beginning point, and as you read through other documents, you can refine.
Right.
So use the proposal document for today in the access for the class exercise.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's 11:50. How about you go to 12:10?
Yeah.
Build it. Right, and pick at least 2 users.
I
And
think they
build
should
the
be able to
use
get it done all, because proposal document has laid out, I mean, all the
Okay.
different types of users in this.
Okay, so then that should be very easy, right? So build it for 20 minutes, spend time, build all of that, and we'll review it, right? And then Kirija and Kushal, I know Kushal, you started using the Microsoft application itself
Mhm.
to write it, so it's visible. But Girija, if you're writing it with that, try to write it with the pen so it's an easily visible when you share the screen.
Okay.
They all should have whiteboard as well, if they wanna install it, they can see the set,
Yeah,
draw it up over there.
yeah. One thing I would advise it, not just for this class, right? But when you get into the business analyst role, get comfortable with all of those visualization tools, right? So the more that you practice it here in the class, the easier it will become into that, right? Because think of this way, right? So I kind of pulled it up, the whole process flow in front of you in 20 minutes, right? That means I have to be comfortable with this, right? And if you use some of the Lucid flow in that, it's even faster than what you did it here. It's the matter of getting comfortable. The more you use those tools, the easier your conversation and capturing the information is going to be. Right? Then you don't have to worry about recording the session because everything is recorded right in front of them into the visual format. Okay. So I'm going to pause the recording here for a moment. Okay. And I'm going to give you time till 12:10 to work through that. Okay. I'm going to share it here in a minute. I'm going to pull yours if you're good with that. Going to download it. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and actually, am I locked up? No, it's here. I'm going to share this screen. All right. So you want to walk us through it, Janet?
The first stakeholder I put is the nurses. They would insert daily activities from the proposal we talked about. It was useful for their weekly timesheets and their reimbursement of mileage.
Mm-hmm.
The second bubble was about inserting immunization info for patients. In future, maybe ODH uses that or some information that the data needs.
Or it could go from here to the ODH and synchronizing online, right? So
Yes.
that's good.
A third is add service data. One of your conversations, you said that the patient would come in. What is given at that point in time, that interaction? So you need to feed in that information, like a patient comes to her, what happened today?
Okay.
So that is the service data.
So what is the difference between that and the daily activity?
Daily activities from the nurse's perspective,
Okay,
because that is the weekly timesheets and the mileage that I will learn if I was a nurse. This is when I'm working with the patient.
yeah, so that's good, right? So that's what the key thing. You want to understand everything you put in it. What is the difference between those two?
Now assisting BCMH families, this I go back to the documents that I read, that Herschel had sent, that you will assist each BCMH families. Of course, my questionnaire had details about, I wasn't sure how it is assigned or the nurse, but this is a bullet point I didn't want to forget that I will be assisting
Okay.
if I was the nurse. Reviewing the MAF forms. So that was in terms of initiating an MAF form based on the documents that were shared, getting the physician's signature, medical forms. So
Mhm.
that will be also under my responsibility if I was the nurse. Also the renewal and interim requests were part of my responsibilities. So those were a few things that I went. And figured those were my, the nurse's responsibilities. Now, if I was the team service coordinator, from that perspective, you are first talking to the customer, the patient, and getting the medical application form details. So you're inserting all that.
Mhm.
Second, you are uploading the documents that they will share.
Okay,
You will also verify the eligibility. Like it is every chunk has some criteria, like it has to be below 21, it has to be below certain, so you will need to verify.
Mhm.
You will also follow for the 60-day cycle. One of the initiatives mentioned that you need a 60-day cycle to finish the loop since you started. So since I'm assuming you were assigned to a family, you will also follow up and help that family understand the urgency, or if there is any bottleneck, clear that and do the
Yeah.
loop. That was as far as that is concerned. From clinic's perspective, it was patient registration. So that is primarily the first point of contact. You feed in all the information like you would call a customer care service.
okay,
And they would just feed in the information into the form is what I got.
okay.
And I also had one more screen, my second thing, that talked about patient account and billing.
Mhm.
And the major points there were to receive electronic claims
Okay,
from the patients, verify the claims, because I'm sure there are some
Mhm.
eligibility that you have to send it to the insurance first, only the remainings will BCMH will pay. So
okay.
you'll verify that and last the calculate fees.
So one thing that I didn't see yet is scheduling appointment. Who will perform that role and task?
My question with the question of homework that I done, my confusion was that, okay, how does it work? So first you need to assign a physician. Once I'm assigned, like if my family was coming to you, is it the nurse's job? Nurses says, okay, these 3 physicians are in your network or whatever the
Mhm.
terminology is. Then the next step would be like reaching out to the office. So I had confusions
Okay.
and those were my questions.
So that's good, right? So that's the key, right? So the message I wanted to give there is based on what you learn it by interacting with the users, right? These are living documents. It's not something that, hey, I updated it and that's all it is, right? As you learn more, you will make changes to this, right? By adding, removing, enhancing the list as you go through it, right? Anybody else wanted to share?
Just in clinics, we can add schedule appointment, patient registration,
Okay,
and patient income.
okay,
So in the clinic, right?
In the clinic.
Encounter.
Yeah.
Schedule, registration, income.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. But once you review the documents, right? So-
Yeah, I did not, I just.
Right.
Yeah, I understand. Once you review it and you're gonna refine it, we'll
Yeah.
review it a little further detail.
All right, what about Girija, yourself and Kushal online?
I did only for nurse because I did not review the documents so far, so I did only for nurse. Can I share it now?
Yeah, was I not sharing the screen?
Because somebody is still in the sharing screen.
Oh, okay. All right, I'm going to share the screen. Are you should be able to share it. Is it not? Because I don't see anything shared.
No, I can see you are sharing. the-
Oh, you are? I need to probably go in here.
But
Oh,
it is-
okay, I got it. Okay, now go ahead, Girija. You can now share your screen.
Mhm.
I had a hide control. That's why I was not able to see it. I'm saying, where is my screen?
The first thing is nurses submitting the form, medical application form, and suggest yes. The second thing is suggesting treatments and work with the other school as well as the family. I mean, other system with family. If the patient is a child and going to preschool or other schools, so they are working with the other systems also, and work with families about the insurance plan and entering the data. What are the services they are giving it, and if they want to visit the house and they are doing that, and if the service is denied, they are appealing for the denial services with the family and giving information about the growth and development of the child to the family and giving other information or other access about the programs like WIC or any program that to be weaved, something like that.
Yeah, now the only question I have in
Mhm.
the, I think you need to think around the scoping, right? When you talk about nurses works with the other system, like example schools,
Mhm.
you think that is within the scope of your PHN system?
Yeah, if the child is at home like below 3 or 4 years, they can visit the home and help doing the services. If she is going to a school or something, then they need to go there and visit and do the services, right?
No, but when you say work with other systems, what do you mean by it? Think it from a activity nurse will perform in that context within the PHN. Are you anticipating that they will, like, it's gonna have some sort of interface to schedule appointment with the school systems? What?
Yes, like particular days and time to go and take the child out of the classroom and do the services.
I don't think any document mentions that, so.
Right. That's just what I'm trying to like, it's understand it. When you say, anytime when you say work with other systems, that to me, it's a questionable whether it's gonna be in the bound of your scope for the nursing system. Because think of it, what activities nurse will do within the PHN, right? Now, overall business process, they may still call school and says, hey, we need to schedule an appointment. Can I come in at this time to get the kid out?
Mhm.
But that is not part of the PHN. PHN system will not try to do it, at least based on the documents. Now, again, we can talk to the users and see if that is the case or different. But that's where I would question a couple of entries in here.
Okay.
Yeah, and submitting the MFA form, right? So that's something you, I don't think nurses are doing that, but that's something you guys need to look at it, who does what in the system, right? Who performs their activity.
Yeah.
But it's a good start, right?
Any questions? Do you understand how things are now getting connected?
Yes.
All right. So you can stop sharing your. All right. So I think we are coming to a point where it's a good point to pause for the day. So let's talk through what is your expected for Thursday. Right, and then remember, like we don't have class next Sunday. So it will be the following Sunday is when we'll have class. So we'll have 2 sessions on Thursdays before you actually get into the class. So the first thing we talked about it is I would like all of you to convert all this diagrams and the feedback that we gave you into electronic format, right? So pick whatever the tool works with you. And
Chart is the one.
right, so Lucid Chart, and Herschel will send you a link.
Yeah.
You can sign it up on that. And then you can actually start drawing these things. Even if you're comfortable doing it in PowerPoint, do it in the PowerPoint. I don't care. What I care that is needs to come up from a pen and paper into electronic format. Okay, so the use case diagram. Right, we talked about the feedback. You should read it, refine it based on that reading. Second thing is context diagram. Right, we started with the stakeholder diagram, the context diagram. Expected that you update it. Right. Third thing is we would like you to do 2 things. One is draft a process diagram. Okay, and the patient registration, patient sign up, right? Patient sign up process is something that you want to draft it up for Thursday so that we can review it, right? Read through the documents. Identify what process you're gonna draw it. Draw a rough draft, right? Don't leave it, I have question and therefore I didn't draw anything. Draw the process. Anything that you have questions, put in assumptions, put that into the list. Come up with all the additional questions that you may have it, so that you can ask it on Thursday to refine your process. Okay, so patient sign up, use case, context diagram are the 3 things that you want to like it to be ready for this Thursday.
It's gonna be a little bit busy week for you guys, but I think I think now we are really getting into the project work.
And then my request is when we start the next session, would it be okay to answer the questions that we may have had? So
that's what we're gonna, when you say it's the 2 things that we ask you as a homework, right?
yes, so that.
Yes, so that's what we will utilize it on Thursday to have that discussion, right? So. Okay. Again, take an assumptions. If you're not clear, make assumptions what you did, document that, draw the first cut of the process. And then we will have into those interactions. So this Thursday, we will start with reviewing everyone's, and I'm stressing out everyone's. It's not somebody displayed it, I'm not ready. I'm expecting everyone to be ready with the use case diagram, with the context diagram to talk through it. And then we will go into the questioning and then the process reviews. Okay? Any questions?
So third evening, we will have the Thursday like homework session, right? But on 6th.
We will not have a class.
But next Thursday, like.
We will have it.
We will have a homework session.
Right. So we'll talk through it, like it's when we wrap it up this Thursday, what is expected next Thursday.
Depending on how far you go, you might get additional process to work through as well.
Yeah.
For next
because
Thursday.
we have to do all the-
Right.
Yeah, make sure you prepare.
Right. The important thing is you need to finish all questioning so that we can draw a process.
Yes.
Additional
Right.
process.
But you're very right, when you read the documents, it starts falling in place, then at least you are better prepared to ask the right questions, or
Right.
at least in the right direction.
Yeah, because you are learning the business side of things.
Right.
I mean, it's a brand new, you guys never worked in creation areas, so you have to understand that.
Right.
Yeah, then you can have meaningful conversation with the group.
Okay. And then like it's the following week, we'll start putting it all, everything into together for end-to-end views. So you're building the pieces. It's important that you build all those pieces to bring it together. Okay.
So this Thursday, we are like concentrating on patient sign up.
only patient.
Yes,
That's the process, business process. You can identify by reading the documents,
Yeah,
the
and then
understanding,
extra work is we have to go through family handbook and bureau children.
so all the
read
documents.
through all the documents, right?
But I'm just saying, those two are, you wanna start with, and then read everything.
Yeah.
As a supplement.
Okay.
Think about it, like if we ask you only to do three things, it'll require you some reading, couple of times reading some document before putting it together process. So it is gonna be a busy week between now and Thursday for you.
I,
Yes, go ahead, Girja.
I have a doubt. When I read the document, I'm just sharing it. It says that work with other systems such as schools to make sure child's needs are met. So is it right, which I wrote it?
So the key thing is, this is an overall business problem discussion.
Uh-huh.
Remember, like the diagram, it said you have processes, you have organizations, you're doing, so some are within the system, some are outside the system. It is trying to give you the overall end-to-end flow.
Okay.
So what they are indicating is that like it's, hey, the child visit may not be only in the clinic or at their home setting. That's all it's trying to like point it out to you.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So as a nurse, your responsibilities are bigger than what this, you're gonna capture it within the PHN system. That's all that is talking.
Got it. That makes sense. Yes. I understand. So case diagram, contest diagram, patient sign up, draft process diagram, 3.
Right.
Thank you.
Mhm. That's it, and you can, we can call it in the evening or afternoon for today. And then we'll see you on Thursday at 6:30.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
You're good,
Thanks,
Jack.
everyone. See y'all
Thanks,
then.
everyone. Bye.